Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about how to make it work if you want to max out frequently on your classic lifts. And everyone knows that uh, I've promoted conjugate for a long time. I coach most of my clients with conjugate, but with conjugate, we rotate max effort lifts every single week, and we do that to avoid accommodation. We do that to avoid overuse. We do that to let us take lifts to pretty serious maxes on a high frequency without having a lot of these issues. The question also becomes, can the same concept be done using your classic lifts? In other words, can you just squat, bench, and deadlift to heavy singles as far as your max effort work goes? Can you do it on a high frequency? And can we make it work in the same environment? And I'm demonstrating like a couple weeks of some maxes from myself and then my lifter Michelle here in the background that were probably done, I guess, a few months ago at this point, a couple of months ago by the time this video will be up. And here's the thing that you want to notice. All right, with this style of training, when I do this or have a client do it, I take a lot of concepts from Bulgarian training, and keeping in mind, Louis Simmons always pushed that the max effort method came out of the Bulgarian method, and he was insistent upon that for West Side or for conjugate. And here's one of the take-homes that I found with people who've run Bulgarian and messed with it, who do the really high-frequency squatting and stuff to maxes. You're not coming in doing true maxes. You're coming in doing training maxes. And what you do, you establish a baseline. All right, you have a baseline lift that when you come in and do this, and in the case of this system that was being run here, classic lifts are all done to a heavy single twice a week. In other words, the upper body day you bench, and the lower body day you squat and deadlift this way. You establish a training max. And that training max, what does that mean? That training max means it's a lift that you could do on a bad day. So if you come in and you say, all right, on this day, I'm going to take my training max, that is your lift that you could do no matter what. In other words, it's a lift you cannot fail. That if you have the flu, you would be able to come in, ramp up to it. It would probably be really, really, really heavy, but you could do it on a bad day. And if you can't do it on a really bad day, after 2 hours of sleep or having a bad cold or something else, it's not a training max. Does that make sense? It's probably a true max. And if you come in and you say, okay, no matter what, I'm going to ramp up and hit my training max, you're good. All right, your risk of injury is going to go down. Your overuse is going to go down. And what's going to happen? You're going to be working with the skill of a 1 rep max. All right. The technique that we use for a 1 rep max usually gets done at anything 90% or above. Okay, anything in the 90% or above range, anything above 90%. All right, there's research on it. We show the muscle fiber recruitment's the same because when you're hitting heavy singles, it's not the same lift as doing 85% or 70% or whatever. That's why I tell people a bunch of technique work with lighter weight doesn't really do much. It doesn't do that much because it's not the same exercise. You're not using the same skill. And maxing out is a skill. Okay? It's a skill. And that skill is to a certain degree lift specific. It is not completely lift specific. A lot of people act like it fully is. It really isn't. Now, you'll have slightly better carryover on the specific lift, but any close lift, there's going to be some carryover. So maxing out itself is a skill that often has a lift-specific facet to it. There's a dynamic to it that is. All right. But in this case, we really are hitting the same lift, so we know there's carryover. All right, we'll get the benefits from doing that. As long as you're hitting a heavy enough lift that's above 90% of your max, of your true max. In other words, so if your max is 500, anything above 450. You're good. You're going to get that training response. So we don't always have to push these to the bleeding edge. Now, a lot of the benefit of conjugate, as Dave Tate has always pointed out on max effort, he just wants you to strain against a heavy load. So you may need days where you strain a little bit. You probably do to make this work. And that's kind of what you're looking for. If it moves really way too fast, it's probably not going to have the same carryover to a max. So you have to find that middle ground there. And once you do that, though, you can get away with a system like this. And then what else do we need to do around it? Well, you need to hypertrophy everything. If you're going to run a system like this where you're going to hit that same lift, you don't want to do other heavier work with the same movements. You know, a lot of people will say, well, I want to come in and do some heavy triples or fives on the same movement. Also, no, that's going to be a problem. You're already getting all the max effort work if you're doing these fairly frequently, which is what we might be doing at least weekly. All these lifts, you're going to run into the overuse issues and recovery issues if you do that. You have to drop that mindset when you're doing this, especially, you know, something like this where we're doing 6 heavy lifts a week because you're hitting all 3 lifts twice a week. That's a lot of heavy work, right? You don't need other heavy work. It's handled, and you're getting all your high specificity of training. Everything else needs to be looking at things like stimulus fatigue. Everything else needs to be looking at hypertrophy. Can I get bigger? Because here's the other thing. When you're training in this sort of manner, you don't need assistance work. You don't need things that help further with your technique or the movement pattern, specifically on the weak points or the weak part of the movement pattern. You don't need much of that. That's all being handled by the high specificity. Everything else needs to be about getting you thicker in the right place, increasing the size of the engine, right? So that we raise the strength potential. Same thing, it's just like an engine in a car. Displacement. The size of the engine will always determine the upper threshold of the horsepower an engine can make. Will it automatically make the most horsepower? No. There are 200 cubic inch engines that have more horsepower than some 500 cubic inch engines. But when push comes to shove, the bigger engine's going to have more potential when you start bringing all the other factors in. You start doing all the other things to the engine that build horsepower, that bigger engine is going to have more potential. Right? It's the same thing with strength. It's one of the best analogies I've ever seen because it's so true and for the same reasons. Increase the size of the engine. And if you can do that, all this practice from the max effort work is going to really, really carry over. Okay? But if we focus on hypertrophy and think about things like stimulus to fatigue, all right, getting the most growth we can while still being able to recover from it, this is a very, very good combination if you want to get brutally strong at these 3 lifts. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.